Michelle and Jackie, come on up. For phone, okay, we're good. So kind of all the rage now are these, what they're called GLP-1 drugs. And if you think about, what's the impact here? We have Wall Street analysts saying that this potentially is $100 billion business. And then you have reports by Morgan Stanley also highlighting that several food product categories could be impacted by these kind of drugs, anywhere from snacks to confectionery to fast food items, and dreadfully pizza could be impacted. And I think what we're going to try to cover here is learn a little bit more about what the potential impact is on industry, on the consumers, what it means to us going forward, and perhaps get into, is there a role for portions here? Because consumers on these particular drugs will lose their appetite, and yet they're still eating and they still want a snack. So is there a role here? And I think that's the kind of topic I'd like to cover. But first, I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'll start down with Brian Kay. Brian Kay is the Senior Vice President and Head of the Consumer Packaged Good Practice at Numerator. Numerator is a market research firm using advanced technologies. Brian will share some of his research on the subject, which we want to hear about. His background is he's been in sales and also he's a product manager for Tyson Foods. Next to him is Jackie London. Jackie has been a frequent spokesperson on health and wellness and nutrition issues on Good Morning America, Today Show, Rachel Ray, etc. In the past, she has been at Weight Watchers, where she was on the consumer-looking side, talking about health and wellness and the impact on consumers. Prior to that, she served as the Director of Nutrition for Good Housekeeping. She's also an author. She's written a book, Dressing on the Side and Other Diet Myths Debunked. And she's also, and the reason she's on this panel, she has also recently hosted a series of podcasts discussing this particular topic with herself and experts on that. So welcome also, Jackie. And here next to me is Michelle Cardel. You need an L and an O at the end of your name. Michelle is a Senior Director and Head of Global Clinical Research and Nutrition at Weight Watchers, now WW. She leads a very large team on the clinical side, looking at the science and nutrition behind the programs at Weight Watchers. She also previously was an assistant professor at the University of Florida, where she founded, Obesity Research Alliance down there at University of Florida. Also was a clinical dietitian at the well-known Anschutz Health and Wellness Center, which is in Denver, at least headquartered in Denver. And today she's also the co-director for the Center for Integrative Cardiovascular and Metabolic Diseases at the University of Florida. So you can see we have a great group here who can deal with this topic. But I am going to start with you, Michelle. Tell us what GLP-1 means.
So you all, can you hear me okay? Is it? I think it's on now.
There we go.
So you all have been hearing about the GLP-1 medications. What this actually means, this is a hormone that our body actually does produce, and the GLP-1 receptor agonist mimics what our bodies are already making, but creating it at a very high level, very high dose. And it's targeting our gut and our brain both suppressing appetite, but also slowing gastric emptying. So it helps us feel fuller for longer. It also improves our glycemic response. So that's why it was originally developed for diabetes. Now it's been FDA approved for the treatment of obesity. And just recently, semaglutide got FDA approval for those folks with a history of cardiovascular events because of the data showing the improvements in cardiovascular related death and heart attacks, strokes, et cetera.
Okay, good background. I always who does the branding inside these companies that comes up with the GLP-1? So Brian, you've come up with a lot of data now on users of these kind of drugs. Perhaps you can give us some peeks under the tent on who are the users of these products.
Sure. So, before I touch on a little bit about who they are, just background on Numerator and where the data is coming from. So we have a panel of about 150,000 households in the U.S. that is demographically and geographically representative of the broader population. And through an app that we use that's engaging and rewarding and fun, these households can share their purchase behavior with us. They're rewarded for that. And then we can also go ask them questions and capture things such as demographics, income levels, ethnicity, as well as psychographics, so social media consumption, exercise habits, things like that. And then we can also go out and then ask custom research. And then we can ask those custom questions on behalf of our customers or something broader, such as the GLP-1 question that we may do on a syndicated basis, and then rinse that through the demographic as well as behavioral information that we have. And so we went out and surveyed our entire panel, or at least those that would respond, which was most of them, in October of 23, and then again in January of 2024. And right now, the most recent data from January is that about 12% of households, of US households, have at least one adult in them that's using GLP-1. And if you kind of break that down, there's two primary buckets of reasons why, right? One is diabetes management and one is for weight loss. And what we're seeing is that while 5.8% of those households are saying it's solely for diabetes management, it's now 4.3% for only weight loss. And the rest either didn't want to report or it's both. And that weight loss bucket is something that we're going to watch because that's the fastest growing. When we did that back in October, it was 3.6%. And so it's grown about 0.7% in just one quarter. The demographic differences between those two buckets, just as an example, if you look at those users for primarily diabetes, they tend to be a little bit lower income, skew a little bit older, Gen X and Boomer. As Gen X, I hate to refer to myself as older, but it's here. There's a slight over-index for African-American households as well. If you look at the households that are using it that have one adult in it, at least one adult using it for weight loss, the skew is a little bit higher income. No more boomers anymore. It's just primarily Gen X from an over-index standpoint, and a little bit of an over-index from an African-American and Hispanic household standpoint. And so what we're seeing, that kind of usage or the profile of the user, if you will, is trending younger and higher income from maybe where it was several months ago.
That kind of sinks in with what we talked about earlier when we showed our 5 segments, our magic bullets, if you would. They tend to be more older Gen X or baby boomers. And again, they're the ones where the problem lies. So I guess that doesn't surprise us. Jackie, question for you then. What does this mean for products based on what you've seen with your podcasts and your work in this area? Do you think certain product categories are going to be affected, either good or bad? Maybe get hurt, and some that might actually benefit from it.
Yes, actually. I'm good. Okay. Here we go.
I got it. I think this requires a little bit of context. So a couple of things that I mean, there's plenty of dietitians here, but I think that many of us in the room could benefit from is a little bit of a refresher on the actual symptom, the feelings that taking a GLP-1 actually creates in patients who are on these medications. And the number one thing that everyone can somewhat agree on, and the side effects can be very much individualized, but the one thing that you hear the most often is early satiety, getting fuller sooner. So hence why we're here to talk about it in the context of portions, but it also really speaks to something else that's somewhat uniquely tied to early satiety, which is some of the symptoms that are associated with GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. So, and that can even be very mild, or it can be a lot more aggressive, again, depending on the individual. But that feeling of getting some of these more trigger foods, high acidity foods, things that are very high in fat. Again, Michelle mentioned the delayed gastric emptying. That's a great point that really speaks to why lower fat foods may need to see a little bit more of a resurgence. And it also really speaks to some of these higher acidity single serve foods that have become very trendy in the last few years. Things like single serve coffee, single serve wine. These are interesting categories, I think, because they could see great boom from actually having, their own single serve built in, the fact that idea, that packaging component is already built in. But it also speaks to the idea that perhaps some of these foods are going to be a little bit less well tolerated than they might have previously. The other thing that I think I would keep a major eye on from a positive standpoint, and perhaps I'm really in the brain trust here to be able to say this, but the one piece of feedback that I have gotten as a practitioner, that I've gotten in my role in media, that I get when I seek, people to come forward and share their insights with me, is that I so often hear from people saying, I finally understand, I finally like the taste of vegetables. Now, I don't have data to speak to this. This is anecdotal, right? It's definitely something that, as a dietitian, I hear something like that and I have to latch on. I'm thinking, great, like any opportunity to speak about consuming more produce. But the idea that can actually change taste perception in a way that's really positive to consume more veggies and fruit is really hopeful from an overall health, general well-being standpoint. So I think something where I would be looking at this in a very positive way about how this can affect industry positively would be to see convenience solutions that maximize greater intake of veggies and fruit. And I know we've talked a lot about today, how this can be expensive and how this can really, create some major challenges. And there's certainly the sustainability challenge as well. But I think that there's enough, again, in this brain trust and beyond, that coming up with creative solutions for how people can get more of those veggies and fruits more accessible, more convenient, and easier to incorporate into an individual's lifestyle is going to be extremely important with the rise of GLP.
So just along these lines, does this actually change one's palatability of certain products?
It seems like it can, very much so. So palatability can be one thing. The thing that I will hear the most about, the thing that I'm asked the most about, is whether or not this changes taste perception of sweet tasting foods. And I have not actually seen that to be the case. That's usually where I'll get, when I probe a little further, that's usually where I'll get, no, I still consume things that taste sweet. They may be using non-nutritive sweeteners as opposed to actual sugar. But a perfect example would be diet beverages, still very much on the menu for patients taking GLP-1.
So Michelle, the palatability issue you mentioned, what other side effects or changes, I mean, are we concerned, for instance, about sarcopenia, as people age with these kind of products? Maybe you can explain a little bit some of the impact they do have. I mean, obviously there's weight loss, but what kind of weight loss do you have, and how does that impact consumers?
Yeah, we tend to see the most common side effects are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and constipation. Like Jackie said, it's very individualized. Some people have no side effects whatsoever. Some people have, pretty severe side effects. If you have a provider who's monitoring you closely, you should be able to attenuate those side effects, because generally they're tied to titrating up on the dosage too quickly. But you can manage a lot of those side effects, as well as the, unwanted side effect of losing lean mass. Anytime that you're losing weight, especially if you're losing weight rapidly, such as the case with these medications or something like bariatric surgery, you're going to lose fat, but with that, you're also going to lose lean mass. And we want to preserve as much of that lean mass as possible. And this is where nutrition plays a really significant role in the optimization of health and well-being, because yes, patients are taking these medications to treat their chronic condition of obesity, but it's not just about the number on the scale. We want to optimize health. We want to optimize well-being. We want to attenuate these unwanted side effects as much as we can. And by prioritizing protein, protein can play a significant role in the retention of lean muscle mass. Incorporating more fruits and vegetables is not only important for overall health, but the fiber from that produce can help mitigate, the constipation components, and focusing on hydration is incredibly important when on these medications as well.
Very complicated, not easy. Brian, does this change the way from the people who are now on these particular drugs? Are you seeing any changes in their buying behaviors?
So we do, and this is, of course, the number one question we get from our customers is, does buying behavior change? And if so, what is it? And so, first of all, again, survey and then purchase behavior. So as we talk to consumers on GLP-1, and again, this is very different. We're not having interpersonal conversations. These are questions on a survey. About half, 49%, say they're eating less frequently in terms of number of occasions during the day. But 73%, so about 3 out of 4, say their portion sizes are getting smaller. So that seems to be the more prevalent behavior, if you will. And then I wanted to find terms because there's a lot of, we've done some custom research for some of the companies in the room. And so I just want to be specific. The next couple of answers I'll give, we're looking at those households that answered our survey both in October and in January, and indicated that they went on the drug in Q3 of 2023 for weight loss purposes. So we kind of nailed down kind of looking at that cohort. And what we see is when they went on the drug, one person in the household went on the drug, household grocery spending on the grocery sector overall went down 6 to 9% overall. Now, that was not an equal impact across all categories, of course. And so several center store categories that you might expect: confections, bagged rice, pasta, ice cream, alcohol get hit pretty hard from an impact standpoint. Vegetables, I'm sad to say, in our data are not impacted so far overall, and nor are nutrition bars, just to give a couple of examples. A couple categories that go up: yogurt, fish, salad dressings. Again, this generally checks out, if you will. I will note that as we see households lapse and they indicate they've stopped using the drug, which we can get into why that is as well, some of the primary reasons, we see that grocery sector spending go right back up to where it was. So there's not, at least in the data we're seeing, necessarily a lasting impact. Final thing I'll say is just from a shopping behavior standpoint, again, for that cohort I talked about earlier, the shopping trips, so trip frequency, if you will, stays generally flat. It's the spend. So, you might have one fewer item in the basket or be spending a little bit less in the category. And that's where you see the impact. So just from a behavioral standpoint.
So is an extrapolation of your findings so far implicating that as more and more people adopt these kind of drugs, that it will have an impact on the sales of both food companies and the grocery sector?
So this is the multi-billion-dollar question around the market cap of several of our customers, et cetera. So I'll let them speak based upon the data more broadly, but what we see is when households are on it, it's for weight loss with that cohort, it's down 6 to 9%. Now, lots of questions about how many of them there will be over time, how long households will stay on. I do think there's an opportunity for many in the industry to respond, which we're starting to hear about in conversations, but we do see that impact.
So, Jackie, is there anything that companies should be thinking of coming out, products that might address this kind of issue, you know, or the things that aren't on the market right now that you can think of that might be helpful?
I think any type of single serve solution that combines lean protein and a source of dietary fiber, whether that would be, you know, these kind of smaller, the classic example that I think of when I think of a GLP-1 snack, and forgive me because I know there are some competitors in the room, but I think of Sargento balanced breaks. Does anyone remember these? These are still on the market. They came out a few years ago. The combination of and granted, it's a more expensive product in the category, but it shows something about the kind of nature of the eating pattern that might be very well supported by having a snack that's similar to this. You've got the cheese on one side, got a little bit of nuts, a little bit of fruit, and you've got a perfectly kind of portioned snack, but also a relatively balanced snack. Things that mimic this concept, I think, could be very successful. And especially with that insight that Brian provided about yogurt, which I think is interesting because there's that dairy aisle component. Again, lean protein source, preferably my goal would be unsweetened dairy, but I can't win them all. So I'll take what I can get. But the idea of having these snacks or these eating occasions that we're really kind of looking toward or building upon as far as fueling the needs of someone on a GLP-1 medication, it contains lean protein, as Michelle touched on before, but it also would contain some source of dietary fiber. Again, because many people will transition off of these medications, and therefore having things that also support those satiety goals, that kind of the combination of those two nutrients we know helps to support and promote prolonged feelings of satiety. So having snacks that are available in that category would be really powerful. And again, I think the more that we can do, and particularly as far as we started the morning with the frozen foods component as well. And I think a lot of things that are in the frozen food section, as far as the mains, could be really affected powerfully and in a very positive way, because we do have more options to incorporate more veggies and fruit here and more lean protein sources here.
So with our limited time, I'd like each of our panelists I'd like your insights on where does portions play with this? In other words, you know, people aren't, I presume, Brian, from your data, people aren't giving up, you know, their snacks and their confections and all that, but they're not eating as much. So, you know, we hypothesize that there could be a wonderful role for portions. And perhaps, Michelle, maybe we'll start with you. Just your thoughts on what kind of a role portions can play.
Yeah, I think Jackie really touched on a lot of it, making these foods that are higher in protein, higher in fiber, lower in added sugar, because we know the higher fat, higher sugar meals can set off those unwanted side effects with GI distress in particular. So, you know, I see a lot of patients that they really want to incorporate more protein shakes. They want to incorporate more protein bars, you know, simple, easy things to make that will help them reach their nutritional targets is really where I think a lot of opportunity lies.
Jackie, your thoughts?
I would also add that I think, you know, in addition to everything that Michelle just mentioned, I also think it can be somewhat complex to find and create solutions that combine that lean protein and to ensure that you're creating a product that has protein that isn't going to, you know, creep up in dietary fat, because that can be hard, can be difficult to tolerate. But I also think that there's something to consider as far as what the industry has seen in health claims and health marketing claims that have become so prevalent over the last few years, certainly the last decade, even more so, which is some ingredients that may or may not have a place in the GLP-1 conversation, like coconut oil. Remember, that was such a media darling a number of years ago. I think it's still having a little bit of a moment. There's also apple cider vinegar as another one that comes up all the time in consumer conversation. You know, should I be eating more of these types of foods? And there's a lot of marketing efforts that go into, you know, speaking about the healthification of some of these foods. And I think it's, in some ways, it's a great reality reckoning of sorts to say, these are not foods that are going to be well tolerated by people that are also going to be supporting the goals of someone on a GLP-1 or someone who is looking to maintain an overall health promoting lifestyle. That's not to say that any of those ingredients are demons, that should be demonized, but it does mean that there's a little bit more of a focus on getting back to the basics. And I think that's something that's really important, that those convenient solutions with staple ingredients and products that can be, that can promote versatility across the whole family, across households.
So I'll ask Brian now, again, given what you've seen in your data, the role of portions, do you see there's a prominent role here?
Well, I'll go back to the data point that 3 out of 4 of the consumers that are on the drug report that they're eating smaller portions. And so, as an industry, CPG tends to win when where they meet the consumers where they are. And so that's a change in behavior. And, the conversations that I've been having at the executive level with our customers have shifted over the last couple of months. Last year, maybe some pretty healthy skepticism that this was a thing, and we'll see what it looks like a year or 2 down the road. I do have one thing to watch on that front, but the conversations I've had recently are a little bit more around the fact that our customers are going to be leaning in from an innovation standpoint, and this is happening, and so we're gonna lean in from an innovation standpoint and be there to meet demand and meet the need. The one thing I'll share, if I may, just as something to watch, not a prediction, is that when we ask consumers why they lapse off of the drug or why they stop taking it, it's not that I met my weight goal or I'm healthy now or anything like that necessarily. The number one reason for a majority is cost. And knowing the American pharmaceutical industry, those costs tend to come down over time. And so that is just something to watch as the drug potentially becomes more financially accessible.
All right. Well, Mona's telling me I'm out of time here, but I do want to thank our panel. This is a very robust subject. I think I'd like to come back and revisit this because this has major ramifications for the entire food industry and your consumers. All right, it's a lot to learn, and I hope we can continue learning more from our panelists. So join me in thanking our panelists here. Thank you. Thank you so much. You good?
Okay, we are wrapping up. We hope you found today's discussions enlightening, inspirational, sparked a lot of ideas. And we'd like to, I'll be a squeaky wheel again and ask you to consider signing up for one of our working groups before you go. But we really want to just thank you all very much for being here today and spending all of this time with us. And I'd also like to thank our events team and my colleagues who've worked very hard to put this thing together. And as we unite across